Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the fifth panel discussion in our series, The World Awakens, where we hear from a lineup of experts on the challenges and benefits of building distributed teams. I'm David Holland from Employment Hero, where I focus on helping our clients manage their businesses in the new normal of distributed teams. The World Awakens series has been designed to explore the opportunities and challenges of managing distributed employment because we believe that businesses that are able to succeed in a remote-first world will achieve better outcomes for both the business as well as employees and create a more sustainable long-term future. As usual, we have Julia with us today in the background who will be helping us curate questions and answers. So please add your questions using the buttons on your screen. I now have the pleasure of introducing our panelists for today, and it's a massive lineup. We're really delighted that we can be joined by these three experts. First up, Denise Meyerson is a board member, CEO and management consultant with over 30 years deep domain experience in education, training and workforce development. She's currently the founder and director of MCI, an award-winning education training provider that is on the Financial Review's list of Australia's most innovative companies. Denise has a PhD in English and is an honorary member of the City and Guilds, the largest examining body in the UK. In 2015, Denise was awarded Learning and Development Professional of the Year by the Australian Institute of Training and Development. And finally, she was one of the first of LEGO's serious play master trainers globally. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that later on. Next up is Isaiah Peralta. He's head of distributed services at Finder and has spent the last 8 years building international line of business remote distributed services and support teams. Scaling Finder from 5 to 170 plus people across Asia Pacific, South America and Europe. He's a seasoned practitioner for a full employee life cycle that sustains through transformation and organizational change from small to mid-sized companies. Isaiah's role is leading the customer experience management at Finder and has also been pivotal in influencing and exploring the Finder crew experience to turn engagement into enablement and impact the people and culture space. And third up, we have Laurie Tyrrell. She's the founder and chief performance coach at Sailing Naked. She's a reformed overstriver and a burnout victim. I'm sure some of us can relate. A former HR director and semi-professional athlete, lifelong adventure seeker and sailing addict, she's been full-blown school of life nerd. She is the entrepreneurial founder and chief performance coach at Sailing Naked and works at the intersection of personal growth and professional development. Laurie has one purpose: to help people thrive. Sailing Naked specializes in coaching and teaching the mindsets, skill sets and tool sets people need to develop self-awareness, emotional regulation, empathy and social influence. So welcome everyone to our panel and thanks for joining us. For today's discussion around learning and development in a distributed team environment, we'll just touch briefly by way of introduction on why we believe these things are important and particularly unique in a distributed environment. Obviously, COVID has a lot of people reassessing their personal and professional development goals. Priorities have certainly shifted for a lot of people and organizations, and we have to check to where our employees are. Creating an intersection between what would be advantageous to a business and maximizing the benefits of the distributed workplace and ensuring that employees are thriving in that environment is a strategic play that will benefit anyone that can master it. Secondly, the micro learning moments that we used to experience at work, in person, face-to-face, water cooler, being able to grab someone as they walk by your desk, those are no longer as natural or available and not as natural online. We need to think at all times about how we reach out to colleagues or to our managers to ask for help, ask for development, ask for mentoring. In a distributed environment, it needs to be much more deliberate. It's a lot harder to achieve online, so learning and development needs to be more purposeful. And that's a word that we're constantly hearing about through our series about being purposeful and deliberate. So with that in mind, we're going to start the way we do each week by talking a little bit about our existing experiences in an attempt to frame up what distributed working is and can be. So I might start, I'm going to ask each of you the same question to answer this question, but Denise, I might start with you. Can you share a little bit with us about your journey towards distributed work and what you've seen and observed and are practicing?
Yes, and thank you so much to everyone for tuning in. As you can see from my background, I'm stuck in the cupboard, which is an indication, in fact, David, that a lot more people are returning to the office. And in fact, it's getting a little bit cramped. And so there seems to be just quite an interesting, if I can put inverted commas, around trends happening in the workplace, certainly for us, where some people are very keen to get back. They want to be part of a social connection. They enjoy the huddle and the cake that's provided, say, on a Friday. And then there are teams that are, I feel like sometimes they're my dog who doesn't want to go for a walk on a rainy day, and you got to pull him along, and he's just putting his feet out like that and just doesn't want to go anywhere. So it's quite a mix of different attitudes, reactions, different ways of approaching remote work. To be frank, some of the teams have thrived working in a distributed way and working from home, and others haven't. I have to put that on the table. Thanks.
Yeah, and so before March last year, you were entirely office focused in terms of your personal work?
I'd say probably 80-20, so 80% office, 20% were already working from home from other states and so on.
And so in transitioning through to lockdowns and experiencing, forced remote, what were some of the biggest things that you noted in that time?
I think there certainly was a wonderful honeymoon period where everyone was so keen and everyone was in the huddle and everyone was doing something unique and thinking of another game, and let's play this and let's all learn together. A team that learns together stays together. So there was a lot of that enthusiasm. And I would say that this year, that sense of urgency, that sense of camaraderie and collaboration has definitely waned.
Oh, okay, all right. As you noted, there's not one solution for everybody, so we'll see. We'll get some exploration. Isaiah, can I turn to you and perhaps your experience at Finder and how you've managed through the transition to distributed?
Thank you, David, and also thank you also to our fellow panelists as well. For Finder, our split is roughly about 40% of our workforce were already operating more distributed. And prior to COVID, in fact, we had already been engaging with remote workers for probably at least 5-6 years prior to that. So it wasn't an unfamiliar climate for us to really adapt to. And somewhat in our case, it was a bit of a privilege that we were able to really adapt to working from home here in Australia just quite quickly. But to Denise's point, I think a lot of companies really suffered from not having a lot of that kinetic energy and those micro learnings or those micro interactions, because I think what we have been able to see throughout that period is that there's probably been more of a focus around how do we stay connected more effectively, more efficiently, how do we align a lot of our goals within our people as well as our learning ambitions towards those business strategies and the objectives as well. And fundamentally, I think the way of work has really just challenged us to try to be human in an unhuman sort of manner. So building relationships behind a screen was something I think that we found to be just very challenging also to address over the years. But yeah, with that said, there's we have a global workforce within Finder. We operate in about 80 plus countries, but crew members span across 36 countries that we engage with actively. And what that means for us is a lot of our crew members need to adjust to be able to work with technology so that we can leverage those relationships more effectively between different functions. And I think also it puts a bit more focus on our own ability to make those relationships as well. So
So you mentioned that you've sort of always been 40% remote or distributed. What was the context that led Finder? Was that something that Finder did from day one, or is that something that sort of was a conscious decision that was made? What were the drivers of going remote?
Originally, we had so the objective was to be able to produce output more efficiently. And so really we're striving for more operational excellence. As well as that, there was a lot of motives behind producing content or producing output at higher volumes. So we had a real a push behind looking to scale a lot of our business very early. What this meant for us was we had to look at creative ways to try to complement some of those efforts. And really where it began was looking to freelancers and contractors to scale up very certain activities within the business. From there, really it was continuing to engage with those members or continuing to engage with those services. And what we had built was more of a people strategy around that. So that way we could effectively continue to scale high volumes of activities without trying to sacrifice also, of course, like the quality as well as the speed.
Yeah. And one last question in terms of your experience, those sort of 36 core countries where you have crew, how were those 36 countries come about? Is it time zone driven? Is it just where you could find the talent? It's where people chose to live? What drove it?
Yes, that's a good question. I think fundamentally we look to attract the talent where one, it makes sense for us operationally. Two, we're probably more bullish about being able to engage with individuals in any corners of the earth and hire in places where other companies have been afraid to hire. I think what's been wonderful about the evolution of the gig economy is that we are now not bound to cities to really find talent.
Yeah.
You can find professional talent virtually in the literal sense anywhere around the world. So it's where you look and also where you're prepared to engage. But I think that also unpacks other challenges around cultural differences and how you merge that into your way of work, how you integrate some of those factors into your people strategy. And
yeah, terrific. All right, thank you very much for sharing that. And Laurie, can we come to you now, and perhaps can you just share a little bit about your journey over the last couple of years?
Yeah. Firstly, I feel really humbled to be on a panel with such amazing, talented people. So thank you for the opportunity. I think if I think back 18 months ago, which sort of is about the time span, I was very much still consulting in the HR space. And one of my clients was a really large business process management company that already had some offshore operations. And their main client, as soon as the sort of work, the work from home thing started to come in place, their main client said, right, we want to ramp up. And these guys had done everything manually. So they didn't have a talent acquisition strategy where they were automated. And we had to build that in a really short space of time. And I was involved in the strategy of that. So setting up what the process needed to look like, the experience that the employee needed to have. I was originally engaged in that organisation to do a project on retention to try and keep the people that were in roles, phone-based roles. And then, we really had to turn on a dime, and I guess it's a sign about what people can do when they're really pushed. The HR team at that company is incredible what they were able to pull off in a really short period of time. And I'm really grateful to have been part of the front end strategy of that. And I think that they're winning awards right now, to be honest. I left that project, but they're actually winning awards for the way that they've turned and done things. So I was really grateful to be part of that.
If you had to sort of reflect on that time when that ramp up was happening and try and think through what were those major moments or those major decisions or those major tools that really sort of drove that success, what do you think the top couple of things might be?
Look, for me, being involved in the strategy and consulting to them at the beginning, quality of product and price point was an issue for them, and their client, they run on really low margins, that kind of business. And so, and then there's a high security load as well, because they're dealing with personal information and whatnot. So we had to think through all of those issues in sort of selecting. I have had lots of different experiences with setting up HR teams in lots of different businesses. So I've got a fairly good, and I've got a bit of a tech bent, I guess. Having worked at Health Engine as a startup, I've sort of had a tech bent. So yeah, I think price point and product, like functionality, the user experience of the product, both for the managers who had to learn really fast how to use a new piece of tech, and getting the managers involved. So there was a lot of stuff going on in that project that was not planned, but ended up as a result for that organisation, changing the way that they did business from a people perspective.
And just quickly, you're not tied to an office at the moment, are you? You're not even tied.
No.
Where are you at the moment?
Yeah. So I started. I always say. I started sailing naked, which is my business.
Sorry, is that the verb or the noun?
It's a verb, actually.
Right.
It's a verb, which is about sort of moving forward and growing, and getting really authentic and clear with yourself and moving forward at the same time. So I started that about 12 months ago when I relocated from Perth over to the Sunshine Coast for some family illness that was happening. And I needed to be able to work with my clients from anywhere. And I kind of really started to like the fact that I was able to deliver wherever I was. So previously, I would have been really pressured by clients to be in their offices and to kind of be part of their team. And now I am location in specific. I've just relocated myself to Auckland because I'm a sailing nerd, and that's where you need. That's where you need to be if you want to develop your sailing. Yeah. And so I do jump between Australia and New Zealand now that the bubble is here and stays open, hopefully.
Now that clients are happy, are comfortable with you being location in specific, yes. Does that open up more opportunities? Are you still Australia focused, or are you starting to engage with companies more broadly?
Yeah, no, look, I work both with companies and individuals, and I have a client in the Cayman Islands. Yeah. So it's really cool. It enables me, and this work that I do is actually not specific to any sort of group. It's a human-based skill set, tool set, mindset that I focus on. So it has really opened things up for me.
Yeah, terrific. Just reflecting on one comment you made there, and it's come up a couple of times, but we've never sort of fully addressed it, and that's BPO, so business process outsourcing. And I think it's really important that in the context of this series and this discussion, we really distinguish between BPOs and distributed teams. What we believe when we say that in companies that embrace the power of distributed teams and remote first, what we're talking about is still that one-to-one relationship that you have with your employees. With a BPO, it's often you're not involved in the recruitment. You have SLAs with a provider, and they just do stuff and deliver.
That's
stuff.
Right. Yeah.
What we're talking about is the same purposeful building of a team, a deliberate construction of the right combinations of talent. Just the fact that those people may not be in your location, or location in specific is my new word of the day. So I just want to really be clear. Distributed teams is not necessarily about leveraging an anonymous BPO. It's really about building teams without being constrained by location.
Yeah, good clarification. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We're 5 episodes into this discussion, and we haven't really had that conversation, but it's you just prompted it. So moving on, Denise, I'm going to come to you, but we're going to talk a little bit now about what learning development actually looks like in a remote context, and the context that we may not have those face-to-face moments that we're used to. Denise, I think it would be great for the audience to hear a little bit about MCI and the divisions that you operate there, and give us a rundown on how you've adapted and changed your approach for learning and development in a hybrid or remote environment.
So thanks, David. We've been around for 18 years. So it's been quite a long journey in the learning and development space, creating learning and development experiences for major clients, small clients, getting people really involved in the way in which they learn, offering it in different modes, obviously. But over certainly the last year, we've had to escalate what was already in progress. So we had already been doing a lot of virtual classrooms, which which were more interactive than just what we're doing now as a one-way webinar. And we had to think, well, clients are used to coming into our, which are normally beautiful offices, not my closet, and they can't come. They don't, there's no way of this happening. And so it spurred us on to being a lot more innovative. And we've put up a schedule now of 60 classes per month, and people come in and out doing very small bites of learning on very specific topics. And it's been working really well. It's a subscription basis, and people have adapted particularly well to this way of learning. In the past, if we sent out a feedback form at the end of one of those types of sessions, you'd hear people say, yeah, no, it was great. The facilitator was fine. Yeah, I learned a lot. But you know what? I prefer being back in the classroom. And you would see that constantly. Now, obviously, you never see any feedback like that at all, which is great. So I'm hoping that other companies are going to start thinking that they can be a bit more bold now, maybe be a bit more creative in what they do, and they don't have to do things anymore like they used to. This is the opportunity, the golden opportunity.
Yeah, Denise, I'm going to assume that you have clients in Melbourne, in Victoria. I'm just wondering if there was a difference this time around for those who aren't necessarily based in Australia. Victoria went through a lockdown as recently as last 2 weeks. I think it's easing now with some restrictions. But I'm just wondering, Denise, was there a difference that you noticed in how businesses coped, say, back in April 2020 versus what happened in the last 2 weeks with your Victorian clients?
For us, remember, we sort of float in and then we float out. So we don't, really live with them as they go through these sometimes very challenging experiences. So when we're there, everybody's smiley, happy to be part of the training, happy that somebody's taking notice of them so they get some training. And then we swan out again and we don't see what's left behind, which but might or might not be great.
In terms of interruption or normalcy or whatever, however you want to put it, the two sides of the coin, I'm just wondering, and perhaps I'm leading the witness here, but I'm just wondering if last week things went a little more seamlessly than they did a year ago, and that experience with that happens. You also just touched on one really valuable point that we should draw out today, which is that we've talked a lot about well-being and recognition in previous episodes. Learning and development is a fantastic touch point that takes people away from the grind of their day-to-day. So we shouldn't lose
Absolutely.
Some of that.
I can't emphasize that enough, that people who go through a learning experience together just do feel that sense of collaboration, that somebody listened to them, that they could express their ideas. It can almost be a game changer.
Yeah, terrific. And thanks to Gary, who's just dropped in some comments. He's a Finder fanboy, but he also offered up his experience where they started their remote journey from when they actually engaged an agency in a different country, and actually the time zones were able to work to their advantage because they could brief it. There was an agency, so they could brief it at the end of the day and then actually do that. So thanks for that comment, Gary. And
brilliant.
Feel free to keep sharing, everyone. Laurie, I'll come to you. Look, I could be generalizing, but it seems many businesses look at learning and development with a hard skill vocational lens. The more technical requirements. So I know that we do a lot of specific training around for our sales team and our customer success team that's very vocational and skills based. How do SMBs, how do our audience of small to medium businesses need to think about L&D in a distributed environment? And probably coming off that discussion we just had.
So much to unpack in this space. Look, I don't love the term soft skills. I call them human skills. I think that, I've made some notes. So if I look to my iPad, it's because I'm wanting to unpack this appropriately. Look, I think that they're the skills that you need to be good at life, these soft skills. They're not just applicable at work. And so, what we actually need to do is transition. I think a lot of companies already have, but that sort of transition from training to learning. So we're now in the modern age of learning, and it is actually learning and development. I use positive psychology in a lot of the design of a lot of the work that I do, and positive psychology is just the study of human flourishing, and which is just a softer way of saying peak performance. So And I differentiate between peak performance and high performance, because there's lots of people who are high performers in their organisation, but their inside world is a mess and their home life is a mess, and they're not flourishing. They're not at peak performance. They're at high performance, but not peak performance. So I make that distinction. And it's 100% why I started Sailing Naked. I spent 20 years as an HR executive watching high performers not flourish and perform high in a high performance way, but not in peak performance. I think the most common gaps are helping people how to understand themselves so that they can get to peak performance. And you've got to believe, or you've got to, as an organisation, as an executive team, you've got to believe in that. And you've got to believe that investing in people and helping them invest in themselves is going to pay off for your business. So you're either a convert to that belief system or you're not, in my opinion. And I think in my opinion, most learning and development interventions, even some of the modern leadership interventions that I've sort of reviewed recently, they ignore that intersection of personal development and professional development. And I think that's a massive gap. So I think as leaders, we've got a big way to go in accepting that learning is a natural human need, and that we need these soft skills, as people try to label them, to really actually survive and thrive and flourish, which is where I work.
Yeah. Look, for those of us who are a little lower on the emotional intelligence scale, like myself, do you mind just putting a label on some of those human skills? Like, just give some examples of what you consider human skills to be.
Yeah. So, I work directly with sort of some of they could be a bit harder, but creating clarity. So understanding what your values are, being really clear about who you are as a person and what you stand for. It's much easier for a leader to give you an opportunity or a career move if they understand what lights you up. So what are your talents? What do you love doing? What are your values? How do you make choices? That kind of stuff. If you know that, it's much easier for me as a leader to create an opportunity for you in doing that. So soft skills are other things like self-awareness. So creating feedback and feed forward loops, so that I'm personally, emotional intelligence is something that it's a verb. It's something you do, it's not something you have. So you can develop your emotional intelligence, but you have to actively choose to demonstrate it on a daily basis. So in the positive psychology space, I work with people to help them understand what their best possible self looks like, how they want to show up in the world, what their values are. And then we work at practicing that on a regular basis. So I set expeditions for them to kind of practice some of that stuff. Empathy is another one, really putting yourself in someone else's shoes and understanding what things might look like for them. And that's really important in a distributed workplace, because our brains are wrong. They tell us lies all the time, and based on our attitudes and our mental models and our thinking, our previous thinking, we construe things and we ruminate as humans, and it's often not true, and there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that the things we think are true. So we have to catch ourselves, and empathy is a really good way of doing that. And there's other things. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to this stuff, so I could talk all day, but I don't want to capitalize the panel.
we might get some questions along that line, and we can come back to it. Isaiah, I noticed you're drawing on a wall there. I've heard a rumor that Finder, every surface is a whiteboard. It sounds like my heaven, but let me throw over to you. You were nodding along there, so perhaps you want to reflect on what Laurie just shared. But specifically, what we're really interested in your experience is that Finder just scaled so rapidly and so quickly over the last 5 years. I think your own team has gone from single digits to triple digits. I'm just wondering, how did you guys as an organization manage the learning and development there? And I have a little note here because a little birdie told me you guys have actually built an LMS. So maybe just reflect a little bit on that.
Yes, I'm one of those kinesthetic learners, so I like to get very busy with my hands. It just helps me retain. But there was a lot of great points that was put forward by Laurie that I think is very true in our workspace, and applying this to how we've approached learning and development in our own business. I can see that you've done your research as well there, David. So I guess from scaling from 5 to 50 very quickly in a span of only about 3-4 years, and then that going from about 50 to 120, and not long after that, our strategy, or our people strategy, turned from attracting talent to retaining talent. And what made sense for us to scale really meant that we had to keep up with the capability building alongside our business objectives. So we worked very, very closely with our leaders and also our mid-level managers as well. Of course, making sure that we had our sensors on the ground to really just establish the right structures in place to be able to support the crew members. What made it particularly challenging and interesting as well as a learning experience for us was that what we were building back in 2015 were really just structures and skeletons for what we're building now. And I think what we can all agree is that there's so much uncertainty in a lot of the organizations that we operate in. Case in point, COVID, which had meant that we had to really change and pivot a lot of our business strategies. The people who are impacted by that a lot of the time are the people. So adapting those strategies as well has been a bit of a focus for us. So I think coming from a startup space and startup mentality, making do with what you've got, squeezing every penny, is something that if you've ever seen Fred Shabesta, one of our co-founders, if you've ever seen him present, he is almost born from a very frugal type of mindset. However, for us, it means that we become a lot more resourceful. So putting that probably in a more practical term, scalability and ensuring that it was sustainable business practice with our learning and development was important to us. So that was the way that we approached it. Every year we'd have to ensure that we're aligned to what the next forecasted changes are going to look like for a team. If they're looking to hire additional engineers, how does that impact your technology? What kind of upskilling and uptraining will you need? Will that put other roles at risk? Which means that you may be looking at redeployment or reskilling. And if that's the case, then we would steer our learning and development strategies to accommodate for that. So a lot of our course development work and our learning needs analysis work, speaking to our managers around what will be appropriate and how to develop those staff members, is how we start to plan for the year.
I'm going to drill in, Isaiah, if I can, a little bit more and just ask you a little bit more about the specifics of some of your programs. So a little bit more about the what. So what are some examples of the training that you've developed in the last 12 to 24 months? Can you give us some examples of what you've had to build, if not specifically for distributed, but certainly sort of recent developments?
Yeah, I think I'll veto back to a comment that Laurie made around challenging our own ideas and I guess our mental models. So with the way that we need to scale our businesses, it's meant that there's been a lot more global integration between team members and also cross-functionally, I think, between managers as well as their own direct employees. Unconscious bias, CQ training or cultural awareness training became more of a topic, where I think some of the symptoms that we were facing were that managers were not leaning into having those like fruitful conversations with their team. And the results of that meant that, for example, people weren't getting feedback. If people weren't getting feedback, then we were seeing low performance, but low performance was actually just because people were not really just having that real human conversation. So we embarked on a bit of that expedition of just trying to see more soft and hard interventions for crew members. So CQ training was one of them, which meant that we got people managers of all varied experience, as well as the composition of the team were different cultures. And we got them exercising some of the communication skills that you need to be aware of in order for you to to build those capabilities. And that was one. Another was a finding that we had was as we scaled just exponentially, we had a lot of managers that were very, very skillful at what they were doing from a technical point of view, but from a people manager point of view, they lacked some of those skills. So maybe those people skills or soft skills that they may have lacked. And what this meant for us was that we needed to draw some more attention around people managing. So we developed a course around a manager development program that looked at leadership as well as management and what the differences between the two were. And from that, that really just helped us shape how we can build the right leadership team or managing team that would be looking to take their function or the business to the next year.
Yeah, okay. A question sort of to the group, and it's coming through some of the observations being made in the chat. How much of L&D today, and it might vary from type of organization, but I'm interested to know how much of L&D is about enabling anyone to learn and to participate in learning and helping guide them versus delivering learning. And I guess there's a place for both. Isaiah, just noticed, you've got large numbers of people. How much of your time is spent thinking about enabling learning versus delivering learning? Does that make sense?
As much as possible, because we teeter on, my role teeters in people and culture as well as learning and development as an arm to be able to provide services to people and culture. Enablement for us is really speaking to the personal aspiration or the intrinsic motivation of the crew members to wanting to learn. And what we've seen is that more often than not, they'll either come to us or they'll seek that guidance only once they reach a point where they've recognized the lack or the absence of the skill. So applying that to a work scenario where they don't know how to perform at their task, then they may seek advice from their manager. If not, they will try and tap into their learning and development budget. And that would be more of an individual contributor route. So it's difficult to try and capture those moments, but that would be the work with our managers. So what's more effective for us is actually to partner with our managers to be able to provide that platform for their crew members. And
yeah.
We start to try to.
Yeah. Right.
I was just gonna ask a question or make an observation from what you're defining as it sounds a little bit like the values that we had at Health Engine that we recruited on. So learning was one of them. So actually having an active willingness to learn. And then this topic that I'm fascinated about is internal locus of control. So that was actually a value of Health Engine, and we used to hire on it. And what that means is it's a psychology term, but there's no other way to explain it. But there's people in the world who think that things happen to them, and they have this expectation that is the company providing me with learning and development, and what's the company doing for me? And they're the passive people who maybe just go through training courses and they tick off their qualifications and they don't really learn anything. But what we were after was people who had this really self-motivated, intrinsic, internal locus of control. So I affect what's going on around me. Everything that I do is going to help the organization do well. So depending on the choices I make and the learning that I do, this internal locus of control is what really made Health Engine different and allowed us to kind of really scale very, very quickly. I'm wondering, do you have the same sort of mindset? And even, Denise, you might be able to sort of share too with your studies and what you've experienced.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, having that innate curiosity and that drive to learn is the dream. It does depend on context. I absolutely agree. But when some of the learning and development budgets are focused so much on compliance and getting people through every one of those clickety-click e-learns that nobody remembers a single thing of after they've exited. And I would challenge anyone on this call to tell me one thing that they remember from a workplace safety or sexual harassment or whatever compliance program it was that they clicked along and and tried to get to the end of. But when so much of the budget is going in that direction of the e-learn, just get out another clickety-click sort of information giving, what's left to develop some of the incredible skills that I totally believe in, as well as you and as I have expressed. There's the budget every year is set. And are learning and development people really seeking out some of the things that are available free of charge, things that people from within the organization could be mentoring others on? To me, it's quite sad. If I could put my sad emoji up, that's what I would be putting up now.
Sorry.
Isaiah.
You were reaching for the button, Isaiah.
Oh, I was just going to, I agree with and echo just what Denise was saying there. I think in my experience of aiming to really build the learning and development function, as well as a way of thinking for learning. So one of the values within Finder is master your craft. And that was really just very, very early definitions of looking to really, I guess, become an expert in the domain or area of post. And let's be honest, within learning and development, it's probably seen sometimes as more of a nice to have within the company. So you're kind of really, you're constrained on a lot of budgets. So yes, Denise, there's often from multiple stakeholders where can we just tap on someone else's shoulder to provide a workshop to have that knowledge sharing benefit. But that is still, it's still a cost, but not another investment. And I think going back to one of the points that you made there, Laurie, I think what we need to acknowledge also is that we're working in a very, very, I guess, complex as well as a multi-layered generation of management and as well as people. There are people that have worked in environments, say, for example, let's say the BPO space, where there's a lot of structure, there's a lot of red tape, and if you start to engage with those types of individuals into a startup place or a startup environment, then they're very strong contributors or drivers of their responsibilities. However, that is also the way that they have been, that they have learned. So you start to untrain and retrain as an ongoing practice, but also as we continue to onboard, say, newer talent. I'll take internships as one example. You see, or we experience a different flair of I want to learn this, but I also feel almost the word that, or the buzzword that we hear a lot is like feeling entitled with a lot of the training, and I'm entitled to this and that. And that makes people leaders like quite uncomfortable, because we have to challenge a lot of that energy into an output, which is easy at times.
I think I really agree with you, and I think that if you're thinking about your people strategy from a contemporary perspective, you are thinking about crafting the mindsets that you want in that organization and how you want people to think about learning and development. You are crafting the skill sets, and you're also crafting the tool sets. So it starts with the mental models, in my opinion, and how do you want people to show up? How do you want them to think? Bring them into the organization either with those thinking styles and mental models already, or really, really work hard on your onboarding so that you can actually shift the way that people think when they come into the organization. And I think then you start to become really, really strategic about your people stuff, rather than just sort of, our goal is to retain people. It's about how do we want them to think and work together and connect and deliver, and all of that stuff is the strategy piece at the front end.
Yeah, and it's a great segue into the next area of conversation, which is around how we actually enable and deliver learning and development, particularly in a distributed environment. But I think definitely the scene that's been set here is that getting the mindset right up front across the organisation, ensuring that everyone feels empowered to want to learn, to learn, to want to learn, and to develop themselves. And to address whether it be personal issues or professional opportunities or whatever it is. But Isaiah, I'm going to throw over to you first. In terms of somebody who's looking, perhaps you're a manager in a business that doesn't have an established or any learning and development, formal learning and development, what are some of the first steps, some practical advice that we can offer out to people looking to get started on an L&D journey?
I think one of the most challenging activities really is just to get very, very clear on what problems you want to solve. You'll have multiple stakeholders and with different views, as well as, of course, I'll have very different objectives. Like some will want cost savings, some will want operational efficiency, some will want growth. It's very rarely that they are looking at it from a people point of view. And what speaks volumes, at least in my experience, has always been to try to understand what systemic problems are happening within the company and use the data and help, I guess, leverage on the data to help you decide and put forward a business case. So for us within Finder, we've had a look at people engagement tools to help us understand how our crew members are feeling when we're trying to become more of an advocate of retaining right talent. It's also trying to put on your listening hat, or like running your listening tour, to understand from the managers what is really what their people problems are. And I think through that learning needs analysis, then you would start to really just unpack what is holding either a function or a team back from achieving their goals. And if you can get very close to that to try to impact those objectives, then I feel as though really the buy-in there is what's going to help L&D showcase that you can provide value and continue to provide value to the business.
Yeah, that's the wonderful double benefit of engagement. A, you get the right answer from the people who actually matter, but B, they actually buy in because they felt they've been listened to and heard. Yeah, terrific. Thanks for that. Denise, I saw you nodding a lot there, but happy for your general observations on applying this, but specifically keen to get your ideas on what you see as the fundamentals to ensuring success in rolling out an L&D program.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we're not a very controversial panel because we're having into so much agreement with what everybody else is saying. But for me, one of the key areas that I just notice so much in companies is that it's comfortable to stay in what we call the library. The library is the area where you just give out knowledge. You don't have to worry about what happens with that knowledge. You let people do whatever yep, I know what the concept of empathy is. I know what I have to do for workplace safety. So it's giving out buckets and buckets of knowledge. We buy a lot of these libraries from various vendors as well. And we hope that by just putting that down in front of people, we've ticked the big button there that learning and development is happening in our organizations. And what I would really want to see, and I don't see enough of it, David, I really don't, is that there is a lot more emphasis put on, well, what are you going to change when you go back to work? What are you going to do differently? How are you going to behave differently? Have I given you enough practice at doing things? And the repetition of it, not just let's go on an empathy training course and tomorrow you'll just be empathic. These types of skills and many others don't just happen like that overnight. And that's what saddens me in learning and development at the moment, is that there's just no focus on that because it's a lot harder. You might have to include virtual reality. You might have to include augmented reality. There might have to be simulations. There might have to be many things that you haven't tried before.
So Denise, I'm guessing you're not a big fan of a nice certificate and a badge. You like to see outcomes.
Exactly. I mean, I'm not saying, look, badges and certificates are still important. We have a lot of our students who've never had a badge or a certificate ever in their learning career, and you do want to motivate and try get that inculcated, because you're encouraging people to get that innate sense of, yes, I do want to learn. But really, you finish off the e-learning. You keep getting the reminder. You haven't done the learning on social media. You haven't yet done bullying, and it's just like, I can't wait to do it. Just tell me what the answers are. Give me the multiple choice answers. It's 1B, or look at for the whichever's got the longest response. Just click that and get it done. And
I love what
that
you're
going to help
saying.
you?
I love what you're saying, Denise, because
Well, I'm old. I can say it.
I want to again come back to the distinction between training and learning. You know, if you want people to learn and you want learning to be part of your organization, it's got to be cultural. It cannot be episodic. You know, there are some compliance-based training stuff that we have to do as people professionals. But I worked for a guy when I was in the learning team for BHP Billiton. I worked for a guy called Todd Warner, and he's now consulting, but he's a formidable learning professional, and I was really privileged to work under him for a while. He talks about the difference between learning and training being the difference between spray paint and a crowbar. So he talks about when you go through a spray paint booth, or car goes through a spray paint booth, it comes out a different color and it might look different, but a couple of months later it'll scratch and the paint will fleck, and there's nothing really fundamentally changed. That's training. If you think about learning a crowbar, you take a crowbar to something, you physically shift it and you change its shape, and that's learning. So learning is about change and behavioral change, and you are fundamentally different as a result of that learning piece that you've just undertaken. And it's an analogy that's always stuck with me, and always credit it to him. But he does write in the Harvard Business Review sometimes, and he's written about this concept. And I just really would encourage everyone to make sure that they differentiate the difference between training and learning, because it's big and it's different.
Terrific. Thanks.
Sorry, I got a bit passionate there, didn't I?
No, happy with that. So I'm just conscious of time, and there's a couple of questions coming in that we will try and address some of them now. I've got a question from Patrick, actually, which he's talking a lot about measuring learning, and he's specifically asking what measures will be important in the next 5 to 10 years. He references some people like Kilpatrick and Jack Phillips, but I guess the broader question here, and perhaps Denise, start with you, is how important is measuring? I know you're going to say outcomes and that kind of stuff, but what do you think about measuring when it comes to learning and development?
I think, look, it's important to me, just having a tick list of these are the people who've completed the e-learns, or these are the people who've been pushed onto some leadership program, or these are high performing, these are hypos, and that's all we focus on because they're the ones who've got the potential. I think those days are really over, but I would encourage people just to look at different ways of measuring things. It might be, I can't remember who mentioned the engagement surveys earlier and the pulse surveys. That could be a measure. If people from training are doing their job better, are more engaged with the organization, feel that their manager can hear them better, that to me is very valid evidence. So it's not necessarily that you have to get down into, well, we can now move faster on the production line, or it's no longer lean manufacturing, apparently. It's now, I don't know what that ever's changed to, but I think that we've just got to think a bit broader around what we are measuring. Is this team now functioning? Are there less it could be net promoter scores, I think need to come into it as well. If we're a high performance team, surely our customers notice it as well.
Yeah. Are there any particular methodologies? I mean, you mentioned NPS, you mentioned Pulse and things like that. Are there any particular, from your academic background, in terms of measuring learning? Is there anything in particular that you think is relevant today?
Look, I mean, I'm still a huge fan of vocational training. I think that, as I mentioned, internships, I'm a huge proponent of traineeships and apprenticeships, because it's it is measurable. You achieve some kind of outcome at the end. So I have to put a plug in there for vocational training and development, because that is essential. I'm definitely not a fan, I also have to say, of these fancy 360-degree things where people are secretly giving you feedback behind the scenes. I really don't like them. I'm sorry to put that out there, but I'd rather just have a conversation, and you can give me feedback and you can tell me if you think I'm performing or not performing, and help me in areas for development. So two things that I like, and one thing I definitely don't like.
Terrific. Isaiah, I can see you. We've only got a few minutes left. I can see you looking at your whiteboard and your notes. Is there something you wanted to throw in there before we wrap up?
Around the topic of what to measure, there was I read a comment in there which I also agree with, is thinking outside the box to be able to drive more awareness around what to focus on. I think when nothing's priority, like when everything's priority, nothing's priority, kind of environment that we work in. So some of the things that we do is look at, so Office 5 is a tool for employee engagement, and we use that to understand what the relationships, or the deep relationships, are between employees as well as like their work environment. So what this allows us to do is that we can see correlations between how crew members are feeling about their relationship with their peers, relationship with their managers, how likely would they be an ambassador, how happy they're feeling. It's, to mention a few, we would often use a lot of that data to get better signals on what we could potentially be focusing on. And I think it's important to note that while it doesn't give you a complete snapshot, at least as practitioners, it gives us an area that we can narrow down and zoom into. So NPS, yes, engagement as well are huge driving factors for us if crew members aren't engaged, but how do you measure that? So finding more creative ways of how you can find that qualitative and quantitative data, so that way you can make more informed decisions around how you're going to structure your next projects.
Yeah, terrific. We had a couple of questions. I can see one. I can see one from Gary and Clem. A couple of people are asking about this difference between accredited training, particularly in a vocational environment, because Gary talked about the NDIS, and some of their frontline workers will obviously have to have specific accreditations. Clem's asking the question: are we moving from action learning and skills to adapting to? Are we moving from accredited training to action-oriented, skills-based? But I think we may have hopefully addressed a little bit of that and touched on it.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'd quickly just add in there, David, is around micro-credentials. And micro-credentials, which are these small little short skill sets, are becoming so popular now. There's a lot of research happening around that, and I'd encourage everyone to look at that a little bit further, because it sets career paths, it gives people versatility, you can move up and down the lattice with them, and it's something maybe for a topic for another day.
Yeah, terrific. Look, we are out of time. I do want to give each of you an opportunity for a final reflection. So, Laurie, I'm going to start with you. In terms of our audience, in terms of learning and development, if there's one thing that people can get out and start doing today, what would you recommend it would be?
Oh, one thing. Oh, look, I think it's, and I just was making the clarity in the box, in the different workforces have different needs, right? So there are people who need training and people who need learning. I work mostly in the professional space, so there's both there. I think for my clients and the people that I tend to service, it's partner with your people, genuinely understand who they are and what they need to be at their best, and then help them make it happen.
So don't force something on them that you think they need. Ask and do. Isaiah, I think you're probably going to concur with that. Anything to add?
Yes, I'll take more of an unconventional approach with everything else that we've already spoken about to add to Laurie's. I think focus on the learning experience, and I think from there you'll start to map out the learning journeys, and you'll start to unpack just little, I guess, nuggets of gold around like, what is the best way to deliver? Is this the best way? You start to challenge a lot of those. Is it leading to a very specific outcome? Are we measuring that outcome? And you can continue creating those journeys as more of a cycle.
Terrific. Thanks for that. And Denise, one final word from you.
For me, it's like, if change isn't going to happen after training, you might as well just take people for a cruise around the harbour. They'll be more loyal to your organization. They'll love you more. They'll do the engagement survey straight after that. Put them on a call with a tough client. You'll do great. It's got to lead to change.
Terrific. Awesome. Well, thank you all very much for your time and your insights. I've really appreciated the opportunity to have this conversation. And to our audience, I'm sure that if you're able to reach out to our panelists on socials, they're all available on the usual channels. I'm sure they will be happy to engage with you and continue the conversation there. In the meantime, that's it for this week. And thank you all very much for joining us. We'll throw some more questions and answers into the blogs, and look forward to hearing from some of you again next week. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Thank you.